A former records supervisor in the Albuquerque Police Department alleges that employees altered or deleted videos associated with some controversial cases in recent years. The allegations were raised amid ongoing negotiations of a potential plea deal for two former APD officers involved in the shooting death of James Boyd. Mayor Richard Berry announced this week that the city will bring in an outside investigator to review the allegations. Our Line Opinion panelists are ready to discuss the latest news on this issue. I'm joined at the table this week by Dan Foley, former New Mexico Minority Whip from the House, Harry Van Buren, professor in UNM Anderson School of Management, former Senator Dee Dee Feldman, and Mary T. Torres, attorney at law, offices of Mary T. Torres.
Thank you.
Welcome all. Mary, Reynaldo Chavez is the former records supervisor. He says videos of two police shootings in 2014 were altered or deleted. What's at stake in these allegations?
Well, one, if you're going to believe what he said, and if it's actually proven to be true, possibly a lot of criminal convictions could be at stake. I would imagine that already defense counsel have perhaps filed motions to reconsider, et cetera, because of that. So that could be a big
So you're talking like a major shakeup potentially,
Definitely.
Resignations,
well,
lawsuits.
I think so. I think so because then if their convictions are overturned, then there could be civil lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. That could happen.
Convictions in the cases where the videos in the cases we're talking about.
Yes, if they were used, I'll explain it. If videos were used to establish that he did something wrong or right or something like that, or if the videos were manipulated in a way so that the officer was exonerated or something, you know. So, but I when I first heard this story, I just find it incredulous. And I think that if it were really true, then why would we see even any videos of any law enforcement officers doing anything questionable if it were, you know, taking it to the huge extreme?
Well, Dan, she brings up an interesting point. Chavez is involved in a lawsuit against the city. He was fired last year. He's claiming he was a whistleblower. Do you think that's going to change how some people might view these allegations?
I think it does. I mean, I think it does. But I think the reality is once the allegations, where the issue lies right now, is these allegations have been floating around out in the city for a while now. And there's been an inability for the administration to grab a hold of this once again and say, okay, we've done an internal investigation, we've come to this conclusion. It just seems to be this constant, we're not saying anything, he's not saying anything. You got reporters chasing these guys around, nobody wants to respond to anything. Now the DOJ may be taking this over. Now we have a third party coming in from the outside to possibly do this investigation. It just is once again, in my opinion, how the city of Albuquerque, they can't get out of their own way. I mean, every time it seems like there's some small bad news, they allow it to turn into giant bad news.
Harry, that's an interesting point. I mean, just listening to Mary, I'm like, wow, this could be just a gigantic morass beyond what we're already in the middle of with DOJ.
Yeah, you've got the concerns about existing cases in which the video evidence may have been used, but we're talking about really, really serious allegations that get to the fundamental trust that people have in the police department. There are institutions that we have that only work if we all agree that they work, and I think the police are really at the top of that list. And to the extent that there's even a question that the video evidence is being tampered with, that really, it's incredibly serious, and I think it really relates to a bigger problem related to culture at APD. After the Department of Justice came in and there was the consent decree, there's all this focus on training and other things like that. And as someone who teaches ethics and compliance, the biggest problem when you have an organization like APD is cultural change. And I don't really see that happening to any appreciable extent. And I think this, if it's true, is really evidence of that.
Dee Dee, are we jumping, as Mary said, she was incredulous. Trust is low right now. So is it too easy to jump to the conclusion that Mr. Chavez is completely factual in what he's saying, even though he's got these other issues? Or should we?
Well, I agree with Dan. The city is bungling its response to this, and it is bungling it to the effect that it looks like there's a cover-up going on. And that's always bad. That's always worse than even the initial act. But I think the significant thing about it is that this has nationwide implications, because these cameras are seen as a response to police misconduct, of a way of making their actions transparent. And if there is a concerted effort to doctor the evidence, then I think that trust will plummet even more. And I think that the police will continue on this cycle of trying to discredit the whistleblowers, discredit the Carrie Brandenburgs, discredit this public records employee who resigned or was fired earlier for his for revealing that he was instructed not to make records available to the press.
Mary, Carrie Brandenburg wants a federal investigation on this.
I totally agree. I think that there should be an investigation. I think the city, I disagree with Dee Dee on this. I think that the city is taking the appropriate steps. They have asked for 2 separate investigations.
Well, the Police Oversight Board.
Right, exactly. But I
they're
think
separate from the city.
But I think that that's what the city wants. The city does want their own independent investigation, and I think that makes sense. The Police Oversight Board is going to bring in a separate law enforcement agency. That makes sense. I think what Carrie Brandenburg did is sending it to the federal agency. I think that also makes sense. But here's the deal. You have got to be able to edit some of those videotapes. I mean, think about it. You've got people that are informants. You have to be able to edit those tapes to blur faces. If you have minors that are involved, you have to be able to blur those faces. If there are victims involved, you have to be able to do that with the videos. And just because it's something that law enforcement is doing doesn't mean that law enforcement is wrong in this instance. And these are allegations that are made, and I don't believe personally, I don't believe that they're true. But they have to be proven.
You don't
and
think
it
they're
does,
true?
I don't.
So I would say that there's no doubt that there's standard operating procedures, right? Like if we have a confidential informant on the tape, we blur out his face. I think they're standard operating procedures. I think the charges are that the things that were done were not standard operating
They're beyond
procedures.
that.
Now, I'm not saying that the guy is right or wrong. To me, it'll sort itself out. My problem is that I think once again, in the last, it seems like maybe in perpetuity for the city of Albuquerque, every time something comes up, we cannot get out of our own way. I mean, the minute this person came up, instead of the administration, the police department, all of those people with already a cloud over it saying, hey, we got this accusation and we're getting into it. That's not what happened. The accusation came out and we started attacking the guy who accused him.
Yeah.
Then we got quiet. Then we all stepped back. Then nobody said anything. Then we said, no, we think we're going to do our own investigation. Then the oversight board, which is not run by the city.
Well, and City Councilor Pat
Pat
Davis also
Davis
called.
said
Right.
that.
If it wasn't for
And he
Pat
was right.
Davis,
And
they
Pat,
would
Pat Davis said he wanted an investigation. He wanted an outside person. Then the city attorney said, we're
Said
not going to
okay.
have an outside person.
And
Then
then
they
we
came back the next day and said, okay, yeah, we will. and not to mention, this didn't happen in the last 2 or 3 weeks. This has been months and months of this dribbling out in the media, and it seems like in Albuquerque that whenever there's bad news, whenever something is wrong, this has been my frustration. There's a lack of leadership of anybody standing up and saying, listen, I'm going to fix this. There seems to be the shuffle, there seems to be a let's pass the buck and let's
As former lawmakers, do you or Dee Dee think there's anything the state lawmakers should consider doing to increase accountability?
No, you got the attorney general as the top cop, and he can do this.
There are already enough people
Yeah.
to investigate this,
attorneys
and
to
I think we really owe a debt of gratitude to City Councilor Pat Davis.
I agree.
Pat Davis,
cop, by the way.
and a former cop. He's the one that insisted, no, you have to go beyond an internal investigation. That's where the city was headed with this. And if it hadn't have been for him, I think everybody else came later. But he's the one that on his own wrote a letter to the city attorney saying you need to do an independent.
Harry, what can we do to restore trust in APD in the city right now?
It's a really vicious cycle, and if to go to Dan's point, the botched response, and I would agree that there's a lot of the response that just didn't work particularly well, then that becomes a story. And it really, I think it relates to the fact that at many levels of government in the state of New Mexico, we don't have sort of basic operating procedures. So what happens when somebody reports wrongdoing? We can think about this in terms of what business does. Business has its own sorts of scandals, but if something is reported in a large business, there's at least some protocol, some way of investigating it and responding to it. And it really feels like in a lot of governments in the state, there's just not that basic competence to investigate these sorts of things. Then as a result, you've got a further decline in trust. And then when you've got this narrative that APD is sort of a bad police department, it just becomes this vicious cycle. So I wish I had a good answer to that. We know that cultural change in organizations can take years. I'm just sort of at a loss.
I think it's leadership, and I think it's across the state. I'm not blaming Mayor Berry. I think it's at all levels. We have become so partisan. It's become so hyper-partisan. I'm not going to run and congratulate Pat Davis because I'm telling you right now, Pat Davis would not have sent this letter if it was Marty Chavez. Pat Davis is as partisan as any of the other guys are, and we're full of them, whether it's the legislature, the city council, the county commissions, and I think that there's a lack of leadership. There's a vacuum. There's an inability for people to stand up and say, look, I'm in charge, it's my fault and I'm going to fix it. And
you think that's a systemic problem around the state?
I think it's a systemic problem around New Mexico. You look at whether it's the school board in Espanola, the Department of Education. I mean, I would challenge anybody at the table to give me an example of somebody in state government or city government or county government that has said, stop all the noise. I'm going to do what's right regardless of what the outcome is in my election or what it is because it's the right thing to do. We don't see that. It's become such a polarizing place to be in politics that you're only attracting people now that are so partisan one way or so partisan the other way that there's no middle ground.
Anything else you want to add to that, Mary, before we, about 30 seconds?
No.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there. When we come back to the line, we'll talk about potential changes in public education in the new Trump administration. But first, correspondent Gwyneth Dolan sat down with some local experts recently to talk about the high cost of childcare across the country. The National Care Report from the think tank New America found that childcare is expensive, even though caregivers make poverty wages. Researchers also found that daycare can be hard to find, and that while quality is hard to measure, very few daycare options are accredited for quality. Let's hear what that means for families in New Mexico.